6.5 polynomial equations. So for this sessions, we will be solving polynomial equation by factoring methods. And then later on in chapter 9, we will look at a different technique of solving a quadratic polynomial type. Okay, so first we're gonna recall the fundamental concept that we learned before, which is zero factor property. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, and 3.1 times negative 99 times 0 is also 0. So what basically that said is, if you are multiplying two or more factors and if the result is 0, then there is a possibility that there is a 0 in one of your factor. So that's what this zero factor property is talking about, and we will mainly use this property in these sections. So solving quadratic equations or polynomial equations by factoring technique is basically, first you're going to write quadratic equation in standard form, meaning all the variable on one side and then 0 on the other side. And then you're going to factor completely and apply the zero factor property. After that, solve for each case. So let's take a look at on example 1. So first I want to write it into a standard form on this polynomial. So that means 3c squared subtracting 10c and adding 8 on both sides, that will be equal to 0. It is very important that you write down an equations completely, meaning it must have left hand side and right hand side. Now you factor this trinomial. So go ahead and pause it and use your side work to factor this trinomial, okay, using the technique that I taught you. So this should give you, after you try it out, this should give you 3c and then c, and both of them will be negative factor, okay, and we want to get tens, so that must be 8 must be split in a way that it will help you to get that. Okay? So this will be 4 and 2, which is going to be 6 plus 4 is 10. So now that you factor completely, using the zero factor property, that will be 3c minus 4 equal to 0, and c minus 2 will be equal to 0. So each factor that involves the variable, it's possibly that the answer will be, the result will be 0. So therefore we set it up each case equal to 0. Now solving for each case, so adding 4 on both sides and divided by 3 on both sides. That gives me one solution. And on the second case, if I add 2 to both sides, that will give me the second solution. So therefore, my final answer is 4 over 3 and 2. Next, 25p squared, subtracting 49 on both sides. So now, I can see that 25 is a perfect square number, 49 is a perfect square number. So this is difference of two squares. So my first minus last, first plus last equal to 0. I factor completely already using the strategy of factoring, right? And then use the properties of 0 to set each factor equal to 0. This is a must that you need to write it down this step, okay? Because I do take out points if you don't write it down. So this will be 5p, adding 7 on both sides, and divided by 5 on both sides will be 7 over 5. That's one answer. Subtracting 7 on both sides and divided by 5 to both sides, that gives me negative 7 over 5. So now I have two solutions, which is negative 7 over 5 and 7 over 5. Moving on to the next example. So the next example is not straightforward as the first two. So first you need to simplify the left hand side and then bring everything on one side and then set it equal to 0. So we're gonna FOIL this. This will become 2m squared plus 6m plus m plus 3 equal to 12m. Combining like terms, that will be 2m squared plus 7m plus 3 equal to 12m. Subtracting 12m on both sides, that will give me 2m squared minus 5m plus 3 equal to 0. So you have to put it into this standard format. Okay. Now, uh, on a site, use the technique that I taught you to factor this trinomial out. So this should have been 2m and an m. Both of them is a negative, and it will be 3 and 1. Right? You should get that. So now using the zero factor property, so which will become m is equal to 1. So adding 3 on both sides and divided by 2, that will be 3 over 2. So I have two answers, 3 over 2 and 1. So the next example, notice that this is like polynomial of third degree, but same thing, okay? So first we're gonna move everything to one side, put it into a general format, which is all the terms on one side and the other side is equal to 0. So subtracting 24x squared and adding 18x on both sides. Now factor it out. So from here I can see that there is a greatest common factor, which is 2. So when you factor 2 and also the variable x, this will give us 4x squared minus 12x plus 9, that is equal to 0. And now continuing this, we want to notice that this is a perfect square trinomial. Oh wait, no, this is not a perfect square trinomial. And the question is, can we factor this? I might have been made a typo right here. Probably this is not a problem. So, so this will be 2x and 2x, 3 and 3, both negative. Okay, so this gives us a perfect square trinomial. So now this will become, I can say that x is equal to 0, 2x minus 3 equal to 0, and 2x minus 3 equal to 0. The reason why I use only x is because I'm looking at 2 times x for this portion, right? So therefore only the variable is the one that possible to get to become 0. So I have one answer already, x is equal to 0, and the other two is the same. So if you solve for one, then it's pretty much done deal. So you have the answer 0 and then 3 over 2. That will be your final answer. So this is like perfect square trinomial case, but you need to write it down into factors so that you can see better when you're solving it. Now, the next thing that we're going to learn is the terminology. What does it mean to be 0 of a function? So if you have a polynomial function and if you input a value, x value, and the entire output will become 0. and that input is called zero of the function. Okay, so once again, if you input a value and the output is zero, then that input is called zero of a function. And zero of a function and the x-intercept are basically the same thing. Zero of the functions only talk about the input part, but when you do talk about x-intercept, you write it in order pair, right? Because the input and output in order pair, right? So let's take a look at on the first example. I want to find the zero of the function. That means part A, when which x value will give me f of x is 0. That's what the question is, part A, 0 of a function. So basically, I substitute the function. This is my function, f of x is equal to 2x squared minus 7x plus 5. I substitute the f of x with 0, because when you talk about zero functions, your output value, your function is value is equal to 0. So that helps us to solve for the variable x. So pause it and then try to factor it out on a side work, and you should be able to get this factor, 2x and x, and a 5 and 1, both of them is a negative. So using the zero factor property, I could say that each factor is equal to 0. So therefore, I have x equal to 1, adding 5 on both sides and divided by 2, that gives me 5 half. So this helped me to get my first answer, which is 0 of function, that is when x is equal to 5 half and then 1. Okay, 5 half and 1. So those are the 0 of the function. Now, when we talk about the intercept, all we have to do is write the 0 of function in terms of order pair. So that means my x-intercept, that will be my x coordinate is 5 half and my y coordinate will be 0. And another one will be my x coordinate is 1 and then my y coordinate will be 0. Lastly, part C, how do I find out the y-intercept? So to find y-intercept, we let x be equal to 0. So that means I'm looking for f of 0, which is 2 times 0 input square minus 7 times the input plus 5. So therefore I got what? 5. So my y-intercept is x is 0, y is 5. And that would be my answer. So this is zero function, so you have to take a look at on that, spend a little bit more time on that part. And then we move on to application problem. Remember, application problem, we always want 4-step formats. I want my unknowns, set up equation, solve it, and then interpret it. So for this example, a rectangular sign has area of 30 square feet. The length of the sign is 1 foot more than the width. Find the length and the width. So in this case, clearly the length is depending on the width. So we have two unknowns. My step 1, the length of a rectangle sign and the width of the rectangle sign. And we know that the length is dependent on the width, so therefore the width will be x. The length is 1 foot more than the width, so it will be x plus 1. And we are talking about the area, so my set it up equation will be the length times the width is equal to area, right? That's the formula for the rectangle. So that means x plus 1 times width x, that will be equal to 30 feet, 30 square feet. Now, distributed, that will become x squared, right? Solving it, x squared plus x equal to 30. So we are solving polynomial equations, so move everything to one side of equations by subtracting 30 on both sides. Now factor, so this gives us two factor, x, and one negative and one positive because of this negative sign. And we need to subtract two number, multiply to be 30, but subtract it to get 1. So this will be 5 and 6. So using the zero factor property, I can break it into two cases, and this gives us two possible solutions, 5 and negative 6. Since we are talking about the length of the rectangle, the negative is not does not make sense. So therefore, my final interpretations will become this. Since x represents the width of the rectangle, so we can say that the width is 5 feet and the length is 1 feet longer, so it'll be 6 foot. Basically, you plug it into here to interpret it. And this will be my final answer. Next question. So Justin wants to put a deck in a corner of her backpack in the shape of the right triangle. And the length of one side of the deck is 7 foot more than the other side. The hypotenuse is 13. Find the length of the two sides. So my first step, I know that this is a right triangle and the hypotenuse is 13. So this is like using a Pythagorean theorem. So that's right away what you need to remember. A squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So what we don't know is two sides. So I can say that the first side and the second side, and one has to be longer than the other one, so I can say that this is the short one and this is the long one. Okay, so one side of the deck is 7 feet more than the other, so that means the longer side is 7 more than the shorter one, so I can say the short one will be x, the longer one will be 7 plus x. Now using the Pythagorean theorem, I can say that the first leg plus the square plus the second side square, that must be equal to hypotenuse square, so 13 square. Now we can solve this equation. So first you square it, simplify each side. So meaning using the shortcut formula, squaring it, so it will be x squared plus 14x plus 49. Okay. First square plus first time last, double it, plus last square, equal to 13 square is 169. That's what I want to say. Now, this is a polynomial equation, so we're going to move everything to one side. That means on the left hand side, you add x squared together. And then you subtract 169 on both sides after that. So this will give us 2x squared plus 14x. Subtracting 169, that will give me 120, but negative. And notice that the greatest common factor is 2, so you factor out 2 out first. That will become x squared minus plus 7x minus 60 equal to 0. Now continue factoring this, and I have to consider two number multiplied to get 60, and then when you subtract it, it will be 7 because the negative sign right there. So it will be one positive and one negative factor. So what do we have right here, right? And we know that 12 times 5 is 60, and 12 minus 5 is 7. So it will be minus 5 and then plus 7. So from here, we can use zero factor property and say that x minus 5 is equal to 0, and then x plus 7 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 7 and x is equal to 5. Once again, we are talking about the side of the measurement of the side of the right triangle, so I cannot have a negative measurement. So finally, I can interpret it. Step 4, the short side is 5 foot and the long side is 5 plus 7, which will be 12 foot. Once again, when you're interpreting, you plug it back into your first step. That's why we need full step format. Next one. So someone is throwing a rock from the top, a throw overlooking the oceans. And when she throw it, the rock, she she throws the rock upward from 160 feet above the oceans, and they're giving you as a function of this, which h is representing the height and t is representing the time. It's very important that you pay attention on those things because that will tells you what your function notation represent. So now what we are interested in is when the rock will hit the ocean. So this is how it looks from a 160 feet cliff. So this is 160 feet. So when you hit the oceans, that means what? It will be the sea level, which is 0. So another way of saying in this question, it never tells you, you know, how do you set it up. So you have to understand when the rock hit the ocean, that means we are looking for 0 of the function. So part A, how long would it take to hit the oceans? We want the 0 of the function. So that means we are looking for h of t equal to 0. What is my t's gonna be? Question mark. So like before, h of t, the function is negative 16t squared plus 48t plus 160. And since we are talking about the 0 of the functions, you have to remember the terminology, right? Hit the oceans. So meaning it's like to the 0 sea level. So 0 equal to negative 16t squared plus 48t plus 160. Now we are solving for polynomial equations, and this is already in general format, standard format already, so we're gonna factor completely. Factor the greatest common factor. This time we're gonna factor negative 16 out. That will become t squared minus 4t minus 10. To continue factoring out, this will become 2 factor, and because of this is a minus sign, it will be 1 negative and 1 positive. No, I factored it wrong right here. My bad, I'm sorry. 16 times 3 is 48. So now we want the factor of 10, which two number multiplied to be 10, and then subtracted to get 3. So this will become 2 and 5. So it will be positive -5 and then +2 to get -3. So now using the zero factor property, I can say that t minus 5 is equal to 0 and t plus 2 equal to 0. And I have t is equal to 5 and t is equal to -2. Since t represents the time, I cannot have a negative time, so this portion doesn't make sense. So finally, I can conclude that the rock will hit the ocean after 5 seconds of a launching time. Okay? After 5 seconds of launch. So the next questions ask you when the rock will be 160 feet above the ocean. So that's basically talking about this. So 160 feet above the oceans, that basically mean your h of t, the height is 160. And we want to find out what is the times gonna be. Okay, so in this case, again, the formula is the same formula function. H of t is equal to negative 116 t squared plus 48t plus 160. And we want to look at the times when the rock is 160 feet. So that means their height is 160 feet. We replace h of t with 160 equal to negative 16t squared plus 48t plus 160. Now, solving polynomial equations move everything to one side. So subtracting 160 on both sides, that will be 16t squared, negative 16t squared plus 48t. Factor completely, which is factoring negative 16t out. That will become t minus 3. Now, using the zero factor property, I can say that t is equal to 0, that's one factor, or t minus 3 equal to 0. So therefore, I have two situations, either t equal to 0 or t equal to 3. Now that makes sense because take a look at this. Uh, this is the part that I erased it. Here's a cliff, right? That's 160 feet, and then here's the ocean. When you throw the rock upward like this, right here, when the time is 0, your rocket is 160 feet. But when you throw upward, so it will be going up and then come back down, and then somehow at a certain time it will be again, that will be 160 feet also. So this t equal to 0 tells you you haven't thrown the ball, the rock yet, right? And after 3 seconds, the rock will be come back to where you originally started off, right? So now the interpretations will be what? The rock will be 160 feet above the oceans after 3 seconds. So this is how we're gonna interpret it. So the rock will be 160 feet after 3 seconds. Okay, so we don't talk about initial case anymore. You can say that, but not necessary, right? So part C is asking you find the height when the rock is the rock at t equal to 1.5 second. So this time we are looking for what is f of 1.5, right? Not f, h of 1.5. That's what I mean, because we are looking for the height. And we know the time is 1.5 seconds, so we have to substitute into the formula. So this will become h of 1.5, that is basically negative 16 times 1.5 square plus 48 times 1.5, right? You substitute into the formula, plus 160. So if you use a calculator and then computing this, negative 16 times with 1.5 square, adding with 48 times 1.5 plus 160, that will give you 196 feet. So we know that after 1.5, at 1.5 second, the height of the rocket will be 196 feet. So going to the last example, that will be very similar to the previous example. Right? So some Caleb is going to throw his lucky penny from his balcony on a cruise ship. When he throws the pennies upward from, not from, this is wrong, okay, typo, from 180 feet above the ground. The function is given to you this. H of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus 32t plus 128. And where h is representing the height and t is representing the time above the ground of the function. So here, when the penny will hit the ground, so that you have to remember when it's hit the ground, okay, or A, that basically means we want to find out when h of t, when the height is 0. And then what is the time's gonna give you that. So you have to remember the terminology. Hit the ground. So now I can tell you h of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus 32t plus 128. When it hit the ground, that means the height is 0, so I will be replacing h of t with 0, and then which will help me to solve for t. So 16t squared plus 32t plus 128. Solving polynomial equation, so we factor completely now because it is already in standard form. 16, first we want to make sure that 128 is divisible by 16, right? It does, so it will be factoring out negative 16, that will become t squared minus 2t minus 8. And continue factoring out, that will be 16. Because of this negative sign, it will be one positive and one negative. And the factor of 8, when you multiply two numbers multiplied together will be 8. Subtracting will give me 2, which will be 4 and 2. Now using zero factor property, I can say that t minus 4 is equal to 0 and then t plus 2 equal to 0. So I got t equal to 4 and t equal to negative 2. Cannot have a negative time, so therefore after 4 seconds it will hit the ground. So now we can interpret it that after 4 seconds the penny will hit the ground. Now part B asks you to find out when the penny will be 128 feet above the ground. So that means part B, that means when my h of t is 128 equal to, and then what is my time is? That's the question. So we know that h of t is equal to negative 16 t squared plus 32t plus 128. So this time we want to find when the height is 128. So substituting h of t, which is representing the height, as 128, and solve for the equation. Negative 16t squared plus 32t plus 128. Subtracting 128 on both sides. Factor it completely, which is factor out the greatest common factor, negative 16t. That gives us t minus 2. So I have t equal to 0 or t minus 2 equal to 0. So we have two answers, 0 and 2. Like before, when t is equal to 0, that means the penny is still in the hand of the person, haven't thrown it upward yet. So my interpretation will be after 2 seconds, the penny will be at 128 feet. Lastly, it is asking you to find the height of the penny when the time is equal to 1 second. So that means we are looking for h of 1, right? When the time is 1 second, that means that's my input. So this will become, plug it into the formula, so 16 times 1 to the second power plus 32 times input plus 128. So computing this, 128 plus 32 is 160. Take away 16, right? 160. Take away 16, that would be 144 feet. So you can interpret it, when the time is 1 second, the height will be 144 feet. And this will conclude this section.